Welcome back, Natural Resources. We are going to look at erosion today and how we can help to control some of those issues with erosion. Last week, we spent some time looking at different types of soils and how those soils are put together and how we judge them and classify them and what they can be used for. And this week, we're going to look at what happens when the soil moves, what happens when it doesn't stay put the way that it's supposed to. So, soil erosion, it's normal. I mean, it happens all the time. It's not necessarily something that's a great thing, and it just kind of depends on where you're at and what type of situation you're in, how bad an erosion case can be. Natural erosion is going to be known as geological erosion, and that happens with land slope, and that happens with rain, and that happens with wind. Even when you have a forest it's a virgin forest, it's never been um, harvested or it's never been cleared, sometimes you still have erosion just because you have issues with rain and with slope and with wind and with things coming through the woods, even if it's wildlife. So it is a normal process, but there are some things that make erosion worse than others. Accelerated erosion happens when we actually, as humans, cause the erosion, whether it be clearing the land for some sort of purpose, whether it's farming, pasture land, um, building a development, clearing for highways. Um, that's going to cause erosion because you're bringing in that equipment and you are actually moving the soil. The major problem is just because we actually are taking the vegetation away. When we do that, we're digging the grass off of the top, and so we're removing that topsoil, and that the grass, the roots that are in the grass and the other vegetation that's there actually help to hold the soil in place. So when we start bringing in equipment, we actually are removing that vegetation, and by removing the vegetation, we're making it easier for the soil to erode. We're actually exposing it to the elements. If we leave it unprotected, and a lot of companies do come back after they finished building whatever it is that they're going to build, a lot of them do come back and reseed. But if it's not reseeded, um, it can take thousands of years for the soil to reform. And just soil that took thousands of years to be created can wash away in a matter of years or in a matter of days or months, depending on um, what it is that's going on. Typically, topsoil is going to wash away faster or erode faster than it actually forms. Because if you think about it, topsoil, it takes a long time for topsoil to become fertile because the stuff that's in there, the roots and the vegetation and the earthworms and all that stuff, as they die and they decompose, that's whenever they become fertile, and that's whenever the topsoil really becomes most useful. And so it takes a while for those things to happen. So getting rid of topsoil can be very damaging to the environment. Um, One of the major causes of erosion is water. And around here, because we have enough hills that water does run downhill, we do have some issues with erosion. Um, Kind of depending on where you're at, hilly areas are going to cause the water to wash away faster. However, we are fortunate in the fact that our soil has a lot of clay in it, and so it's not going to erode as quickly as if it had a lot of sand in it. So the water is going to remove a lot of these soil particles, and is the major cause of soil erosion that we have in the United States. There's a couple of different ways that we look at it. One is splash erosion, and basically that's when the raindrops hit the soil and they just dislodge the particles. Sometimes whenever it's a dry summer and you're in a dusty part of a hot season and you see it rain, you literally can look down at the ground and see the dust fly up as the rain begins to hit the ground. That's kind of what we're looking at with splash erosion, just the actual pressure of the water falling on it, causing the soil to move. Runoff erosion is going to be as water flows downhill. and as it flows downhill, it's going to pick up soil particles and take those soil particles with it. So those are two major types of erosion involving water. Wind is another major cause of erosion, especially in areas where you have a lot of sand. Not as big of an issue here in this part of the state because we do have clay soil, so that's one thing that's good about that clay soil. But in parts where we have sand, those large particles, because they are not clung together with other large particles, do get blown away fairly easily. So that's why when you go to the beach, they have dunes, and they typically have got things like sea oats and stuff planted on the dunes, because not only do you have issues with the tide washing water in, but you also typically have a sea breeze as well. So vegetation is the best way to prevent wind erosion. So you may see something like sea oats planted, or you may see grass planted in an area, or even trees help sometimes with wind erosion as well. So when we're looking at erosion, you're looking at three major results of what happens whenever something erodes. Sheet erosion, this is what it happens over time, and you're just kind of wearing away a little layer at a time. I usually think about this like whenever I'm driving down a driveway. Normally, when you're driving down a dirt driveway, you have the two parts of the driveway where the tires go, and then you usually have a little green strip in the middle because you're driving over the same place every single time. And when you're driving over that same place every single time, you're pulling a little bit of soil with it every time you come through there. So that's sheet erosion. Sometimes you also see it in pastures where there's cows. Cows will walk the same path over and over and over. So sometimes you actually see those cow paths, and those cow paths are going to be sheet erosion. So it's gradual, and a little bit is taken at the time, whereas these other two that we're going to look at they're going to come more quickly. The first one is real erosion, and this one is going to come more quickly because you're looking at little streamlets cut into soil surface by running water on sloping land. So this is something that you're going to see in our part of the state because we have enough sloping land that you can actually see this happening. So if you go to an area that's kind of hilly and you see these little crevices, these little tiny little, well, you see this picture, I mean, a hand could fit into it. These are just cracks that you see on the surface. This is called real erosion. And so that is fairly common around here. When it gets really, really bad, and you really start seeing things wash away at a rapid pace, then you see something like gully erosion. And the gully erosion, it's pretty bad. We had a situation at my parents' house a few years ago where some people bought a piece of land that was behind my parents' house, and there had been a drainage ditch in between their piece of land and this other piece of land that was bought. And the person that bought it decided they didn't need a drainage ditch, didn't want a drainage ditch, and so they closed it in. And when they closed it in, there was nowhere for water to run off. And me being from the eastern part of the state, sandy soils, and so we would have these major rains from things like hurricanes and tropical storms, and it washed a huge gully into the field. And so that was something that had to be fixed because the drainage ditch was taken out, so there was nowhere else for that soil to be able to go, or that water to be able to go, and it just washed the soil right away. So this is something you do have to be careful of, and kind of prevent things like gully erosion from happening. And we're going to look at some ways that you can prevent those types of things from happening, and we're going to call those soil conservation practices. And there's a lot of options that can be used for soil conservation practices. So, soil conservation itself is just efforts that are used in order to ensure that the quantity, the amount of soil, and the quality of our soil stays the same. And you want to make sure that you're looking at, yes, urban, because we are moving soil and planting stuff and building roads and building sidewalks. So there is always a lot of movement in urban areas, but we also want to make sure that we're looking in these rural areas too, because again, like I said, my parents lived in an area that is rural, and this drainage ditch, when it was gone, really caused a lot of problems as far as erosion. So soil conservation is going to help make sure that we can continue to have quality soils for future generations. The main concern is to make sure that we're keeping it covered up. So planting some sort of a cover crop is extremely helpful. It helps to control how much water is actually washed away in the soil. Mulching does help. It's not quite as beneficial, I would say, as using a cover crop, but mulching does help. And so when you're putting mulch over the top, it's going to wash more of the mulch away and less of the soil away. It is not quite as beneficial as the cover crop, but it does help. Silt fences also help. Now, if you're looking at this right here, you can see these silt fences typically are going to be planted at the bottom of a slope, and it allows water to pass through, but it's going to hold the soil. And it looks to me like they must have gotten a pretty heavy rain in this type of situation, because right here you can still see a lot of the water that has not seeped into the soil yet, and it has not gone through that silt fence. So basically, these silt fences just help to keep the soil where they're supposed to be. No, it's not up on the hill anymore, but it's not down on this sidewalk either. And so the purpose is to keep it in this area versus washed away. Cover crops, I've already mentioned those, having some sort of a vegetation on soil to keep that soil in place. Very beneficial. Putting lands and buildings and things like that on the contour of the land, and we're going to look at some contour stuff in just a little bit. Planting trees and shrubs, all these things help to hold the soil in place. The roots are going to hold the soil. The canopy of the tree or the crown of the tree is going to help reduce how quickly the raindrops actually hit the ground. They kind of take a little bit of the pressure off of the soil, so that's particularly helpful. You can use what's called a stabilizing bank. And really, here you're putting things on creek banks and road slides in order to hold soil. You probably have seen this in the mountain before. In the mountains, sometimes when you're riding along, you will see vegetation, or sometimes even concrete, and sometimes it's even like fences, like a wire fence to hold stuff where it's supposed to be, just to kind of help stabilize something so that it's not eroding. So stabilizing banks can sometimes be beneficial. Making sure that stormwater goes the way that it's supposed to, and using curbs and ditches and those storm drains the way that they're supposed to be used, and making sure that storm drains are not clogged up are extremely important. Runoff from parking lots causes a lot of issues with urban erosion. So just making sure that curbing is in place and that storm drains are not blocked is important. So when we look at conservation as far as agriculture goes, we want to make sure that we are doing our part as good stewards of the land to make sure that we are not getting rid of any more soil than we have to. Soil conservation is extremely important. I already mentioned planting on the contour, and basically what that means is that if you were standing at the top of the hill and you were to kind of look around you, that crops should be planted kind of like in a donut shape versus being planted in rows that go up and down the hill. And basically that just means that you are trying to keep the soil from washing up and down the hill. If you plant it on the slope, then you're more likely going to have issues with erosion. You're also more likely going to have issues with losing some of your seeds as they wash down the hill. Rotating crops, not planting the same crops every year, is also beneficial. That's beneficial for several reasons. One, because you're getting different types of stuff in there, and certain types of things remove different types of nutrients in the soil, and so you're not removing the same nutrients from the soil over and over, and maybe you're adding something that's beneficial by rotating those crops. You're also leaving different types of habitats for animals that are coming in as well. So rotating crops is pretty beneficial. Um, some people do what's called terracing, and terracing basically means that you have kind of gone in and made flat places across a slope, and this is like a major example here of terracing. We don't see anything that's too um, complicated where we are as far as terracing, but you do see sometimes where people will make flat places in a sloping area, so that it does help to keep the erosion from being such an issue. Putting grassy strips near lower areas also helps. It is going to, I mean, the soil is still going to wash down the hill, but perhaps it keeps it from washing away, kind of like the way the silt fence did. Using ditches to carry and divert water away, that's what I was talking about before, a drainage ditch. If you can get that water going where you want it to versus running where it wants to, then it can be more beneficial to you, and it can keep you from having issues with having gullies in your crops. Vegetative covers, having some sort of a cover crop is helpful, because again, those roots are going to help to hold that soil down. A couple more. Doing strip cropping. This is a good picture of cropping, and what they're doing here is they're planting different crops, and still the same amount as they would plant before. Maybe instead of just planting it in a quilt-like pattern, they're planting it in rows and alternating strips, and this helps to keep the soil from washing away by having different stuff up there and different types of filtering. Finally, conservation tillage. We're planting crops with little or no plowing. We also call this no-till, and this just keeps us from disturbing the soil. You can't always do conservation tillage, but it is beneficial when you can. And windbreaks. Windbreaks are typically going to be rows of trees that are put near cropland in order to keep you from having soil that gets blown away. So all of these are measures that we use in order to help to conserve the soil and help to prevent erosion. Next time, we will look at water and water pollution, the water cycle itself, and how all that stuff works. So I will see you guys very soon.